hi, and welcome to another episode of Wellness in the Workplace. My name is Mbali Mzinyane, and I am your host. Wellness in the Workplace is a podcast that aims to equip new and experienced professionals with the tools and insights to navigate challenging workplace dynamics. And on today's episode, we are continuing with our series titled The HR Perspective with Boniwe Dunster, where we unpack HR-related topics centered around the employee life cycle from the time of recruitment all the way until an employee decides to leave an organization. And on today's episode, we are talking all things money. We're talking salaries, salary negotiation, salary increases, as well as how to have that often difficult and challenging discussion with your boss. And I have with me in studio HR specialist, facilitator, coach, as well as the founder of Blue Eagle Human Capital, Boniwe Dunster. Welcome to Wellness in the Workplace.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining. It's always a pleasure having you in studio. And today's topic is particularly one that's interesting to me because I enjoy talking about money. And I think it's one that's just going to really shed light on how we can be more strategic about talking about salaries and how we position ourselves when we are going into a job or when we are negotiating for a salary increase. So we know that we enter employment contracts with the intention of exchanging our services and skills for money at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. But many of us actually struggle to have discussions around our worth, around our value in relation to our salaries. Why do you think that is the case?
The challenge is money is a very difficult or uncomfortable conversation. So once you start asking for more or once you start talking about your worth, right, one can actually believe that they are really not worth what they are asking for. But many a times it's purely because you don't want to create animosity or hostility in the workplace. People might think that you are blowing your own horn, and it might not be the case. The other thing is also sometimes around culture, how we were brought up, how to approach certain conversations. And in many instances, especially in an African culture, we are brought up in a sense of having to believe that I need to be grateful that I have a job.
Sure.
Right? And that gratefulness sometimes can actually be the disadvantage of actually being appreciative of the job, but not, being confident enough to talk about what your value is. So people are scared because what if I lose that job opportunity if I ask for more? Sure. So for me to get into that company, let me accept whatever that they are giving me. I've just been promoted to a manager level. Let me not negotiate because you know what, they might take that promotion and we end up actually accepting whatever that is put in front of me, not knowing that there is more from where that came from.
Yes. So you're speaking more around, I guess, a mindset of fear, mindset of scarcity, a mindset of lack that people might need to actually just navigate through in the process of negotiating for salaries. So then when a potential employer asks you what your salary expectations are, how then should you respond to a question like that? Do you use your current salary as a baseline? Do you use the market-related salary as a baseline? What are some of the key considerations in answering a question like that?
That's a very tricky question to answer, and there isn't a straightforward answer, right? You need to consider, do I give a figure, which might actually disadvantage me if I actually, give myself a low figure, or sometimes you might not even know what the value of your role is. So for me, it's that once you are engaging in a salary negotiation process, make sure that you actually understand the role that you are at or the role that you want to move into.
Yes.
Do your research by understanding what is the market paying for that role. We know that in South Africa particularly, salary informations are not really easily accessible because employers don't get to share the salary scale. So that is a very tricky question because one needs to understand that there are multiple dynamics at play when having to negotiate your salary. You cannot only work on the base of what you're currently earning. So you also need to understand the role that you're in and the one that you're potentially going into. You need to understand what is the market-related salary for that particular position. And we know that in South Africa particularly, salary informations are not easily accessible. So you need to engage with peers in the same industry or profession to understand more or less what to expect. You need to do your research around what is being paid, and that can be accessible on a number of research, but it's not always 100% accurate. So you can look at Glassdoor, you can look at REM Channel, right? But what you need to consider is that what qualifications do you have? What expertise do you bring? What contribution are you going to make to that particular company? And as well, also understand the industry that you're going into. You might be moving from a small, medium enterprise, or maybe moving from an NGO, going into a big corporate. So using your base alone is not really sufficient for you to put that, right? Because oftentimes people work on a base of like 15 to 25%, but 15 to 25% coming from a small, medium enterprise into corporate, it's not the same. So it's like it's chalk and cheese.
Yeah.
So you might actually need to consider that. And also, you can even ask the employer or the recruiter to say, what is your budget for this particular role, so that you can make an informed decision to provide a correct answer, or a suitable answer.
Yes.
And then the other thing, you can even say, if they are not even willing to give you their budget, can they give you a range, so that you in turn can also give them a range in terms of what you would be expecting. So it's a very tricky question. Giving a figure might actually disadvantage you. However, giving a range it's much better, because I will not go below this particular range, right? And then you can actually provide that, so that when they give you an offer, you know exactly where to play it. So it's not a straight answer, because even if you say market related based on what? Based on what market, based on what research, based on what kind of information. So it's a bit tricky, but just make sure that you are well informed about the role in the industry and the organization that you're going into.
Yeah. And if you're cornered to having to provide your payslip, because we see that as a very popular tactic for potential employers, requesting a payslip as a means to benchmark your salary. What do you then do when you're being asked for your payslip?
That's also another difficult question, or another difficult situation for one to have to navigate. First of all, asking for a payslip, it's not legislated, And often people assume that when employers or recruiters are asking for payslips, it's legislated to an extent that if maybe I don't provide it, they might think that I will not get the job, which honestly does happen, but it's not a requirement, right? There's multiple ways to actually navigate that. First of all, you can actually ask why, and they will answer that for them to make sure that they don't really, give you a lower salary or a lower offer. But again, you can also say, can you just advise me what your budget is, so that we both share information equally. However, we know that recruiters or employers have the upper hand, right? So if you say no, they might actually withdraw your application, right? And I also believe that payslips also holds, confidential information, your own as a candidate, and that of the employer as well. So having to give that, do you have permission to also share, that personal information of all the parties that are involved there? You're even sharing your banking details, because sometimes they're actually in your payslip, right? So for me, it's all about saying, let's have an open communication. Let me know what is your budget for this role, so that I can make a decision whether it's something that I'm willing to move for or not move for. And if they insist, also insist on them having to share your budget. So it's a bit tricky, but you actually have to know how to negotiate your way around that.
Yes, definitely. So we know that salary negotiations differ vastly when you're negotiating for a salary, for a new position, when you're an external potential candidate, versus when you are currently within an organization and negotiating for a salary increase, whether it is in your current role or you're trying to navigate to a different role within that organization. What are then some of the key considerations that one needs to take into account if you are already in an organization and you want a salary increase within your current role, or potentially moving to another role within the same company?
Sure. What's important around there is actually to understand your organization's performance management process and their remuneration policy as well. Some companies, they actually do ad hoc increases, right? Or they actually do performance increases and all of those things. So
what's the difference, ad hoc versus performance?
So ad hoc increases would be like randomly out of cycle, not necessarily at an increased time. So it can be done at any given point in time during the course of the year based on whatever reasons that the employer might have. And when it's performance based, you'd find that one has to work for a performance year. And then once they have received a performance rating, then that will influence the increase that they're going to get. Right, but the consideration is around the timing. First of all, you need to make sure the timing is right. Secondly, have enough information to support your request, such as performance, because no employer is going to be considering a salary increase request if the employee is not performing. What is it that you've performed over the past year or a past period? If you were maybe involved in a particular project that has yielded results, maybe you have saved money, maybe you have introduced efficiencies in in your work, you need to make sure that there are metrics to support your request, right? And understand what your request means for you. And again, you might also want to see, like, is it a good time in a sense of where are we in the financial year? Has the company performed well for them to be able, to afford an increase for myself? So those are some of the things that you need to have, but make sure that you have, evidence that's going to support your request, substantiate that, from all angles. And then it might get to a point that your employer might say no, because it's not guaranteed that your request is going to be, acknowledged. But if they do say no, you also need to understand, why are you saying no? Is it a timing thing or is it money? If it's money, when can we revisit the conversation? If probably it's the timing, when would be the right time? If maybe they feel that you are not there yet to get that increase, then ask them, what exactly do I need to do for me to get to that level of me, being eligible for that increase? So make sure that you're strategic around it, you get your ducks in a row, and if the answer that you get is not satisfactory, and at no given point in time it seems as if you're not going to get that increase, you might also actually get to a point of I might want to consider having to leave the organization, because it doesn't mean it doesn't look like I'm going to get it here. So it's very important that have that conversation, but prepare for anything. It can be a yes, it can be a no, but I always say to people, it is important to ask. The worst that you can get is a no, and sometimes you can ask and then you can get it. So don't hold yourself back, especially when you see and feel that your contribution has actually, brought changes in the organization, and where you see that you have taken on more scope and responsibilities, those are some of the things that you can use to request for that.
Yeah. So you highlighted quite a bit around performance being a key metric and a discussion point when it comes to salary negotiation or salary increases. Is it exclusively performance-based? Or are there other means in which one can go to their manager, to their boss, to say, look, this is where I am, and I would like to submit a request for a salary increase for the following reason, and it may be just outside of the performance?
That's very rare. I would say maybe sometimes it does happen, but that's very rare, because remember, as an employer, you also want to pay for performance, and there needs to be a return on investment in terms of what you are offering the other people. So if it's not performance based, what would be the basis other than performance? Unless probably someone has taken additional scope, right? Then you can say, I need to compensate for the additional scope. Maybe you have reduced your head count, and that means your people taking on more, and you might actually want to compensate that. But it's rare where you can go to your employer and ask for an increase purely because the petrol price has gone up, the bread price has gone up, or you can't afford your bond anymore because the interest rates have went up. So those are reasons that cannot be considered, because you are not the only one that's affected by that. And that's why performance or a work-related reasons would form the basis of your request to getting an increase.
Okay. And I think that part of the discussion segues nicely into the next question. So the next question is around benchmarking.
Sure.
So we've heard the term used quite a lot when it comes to salary negotiations, and I think when it comes to a salary increase, it is one of the things that could also prompt maybe an increase out of cycle.
Sure.
It could prompt an increase outside of performance. So for anyone that doesn't know what salary benchmarking is, do you mind maybe just explaining what that is and why it's important as an employee to actually know what that is?
So in layman terms, when you're talking about a benchmark, we're talking about an exercise that really indicates, the value of a role that people have. So you have multiple roles in an organization, and they differ from one, department, whether it's in finance, it's in human capital, it's marketing. So all those roles need to be benchmarked against, probably you will have your own internal benchmark, but then there will also be like external benchmark in terms of what does a marketing manager role pay in the market and in the industry generally, right? And benchmarking is to ensure that your people are not paid less than what their worth is in the market. So what employers try to do when they participate in this benchmarking exercise is to get the right level of information to get to influence their remuneration policies in the organization, or how they generally remunerate people, because you don't want to get into a point whereby your people are overpaid, right? Which might make it difficult for them to grow or to move. You don't also want to underpay your people, because that might short sell themselves when they need to move in the market. But you want to make sure that you participate fairly in the market, because there's a war for talent. We're all looking for like similar skills. There's a shortage of skills. So this benchmark helps us to actually form the basis of having to allocate the right salaries to people. So it's an exercise generally to understand what is the value of a particular role, of a particular skill set, of a particular industry.
Yeah. And just maybe a follow-up question to that. Has there ever been a case from your experience where
Sure.
someone was overpaid in a role and they had to reconsider how much they paid them after doing a benchmarking exercise? Because that would be very unfortunate.
Right. So I have seen instances whereby one or two people in a particular team, they're actually overpaid compared to their peers, or they are also paid above the salary band, right? However, you will not necessarily, as an employer, have a conversation with that employee to say we need to cut your salary, because a salary is a term and condition of employment. So you can't just go and say, I'm cutting your salary because you're overpaid. So if you're changing someone's terms and conditions of employment, you need to make sure that you do that through consultations. But what are the chances of someone having to agree to a salary cut? But another thing that I have also seen in corporate, you'd find that if someone is highly paid, and it could be purely because maybe they came from a higher base from the previous company or previous position, or maybe they have been consistently high performers over the years, and they are paid way above the salary band. The disadvantage of that is that we have seen employers whereby they will actually start giving you a lesser annual increase as compared to what you deserve. So probably you should be getting a 7%, but they will actually opt to give you a 3 or a 4%, so that they could try to probably bring you into the band, because the bands actually, they should be moving every year, there should be inflationary increases to those bands, so they can actually give you less, so that you do not create a huge gap between yourself and your peers. But you'll hardly find employers having to cut your salary because you've been highly paid. That would never happen.
Do you mind maybe explaining a bit more around salary bands?
Sure. So what salary bands are is that in organizations, like, you would find that each and every role or function, like as I indicated, you've got an HR function, marketing function, finance function, engineering, and all of those things. So each and every function has roles or has levels, right? So you could be a level 1, 2, 3, or you could be grades, depending on what salary scales your organization uses. So what happens is that each role and each level will have a salary band in terms of how you can pay people, what is the minimum and what is the maximum. So if you are a consultant, you could have a range from 10,000 to 20,000, maybe at a manager, it could be from 9,000 or 8,000 to 20. So that informs you in terms of what range you have in which you can play around to be able to remunerate or inform your decisions, right? So that you don't actually get to having to overpay people or to actually having to underpay people. So they try to actually guide how you manage remuneration within your organization and with the teams that you have.
Got you. Another big part of the salary discussion is the confidentiality around payslips.
Yes.
And a lot of people believe that, the reason why organizations say that payslips and salaries need to be kept confidential is to manage the potential discrepancies and disparities around pay gaps. Mm-hmm. What do you think some of the reasons are for keeping salaries confidential? Because I think we would all benefit from a level of openness and transparency, just in terms of standardizing. But I guess maybe from a personal reason, some people might just generally not want to disclose that type of information. But if we were to look at it from an employment and employee practice, what do you think the benefits would be around being more open and transparent around how much we earn?
Transparency always yields to trust.
Okay.
So, if you were
it's a good starting point.
It's a starting point, right?
Yeah.
We always talk about integrity and honesty. So if you are open, obviously it creates that. However, most employers, they would say that say salary information is confidential. On a personal note, I believe that to a certain extent it also perpetuates some injustices within the system.
Definitely.
And it makes it difficult to have to redress some of, the injustices of the past.
Definitely.
So we get to perpetuate that by saying salary information are confidential. And if you were my peer and you were earning 50,000 and probably I was earning 40,000, yes, there's a 10,000 gap, right? But it can be justified because sometimes we talk about equal pay for equal work.
Yes.
But if you're earning 10,000 more than me, it could be justified. Maybe you've got 5 years experience and I've got 3.
Yes.
I started working later than you.
Yeah.
And then maybe you might have more qualifications than I have. You might have more complex clients than what I have. So salary differentiations, they actually have reasons to it and they can actually be justified. But oftentimes when you say people must not disclose, it also comes as if you are hiding something.
Yes.
Because if I was to find out to say, but why isn't Bali earning more? My manager should be comfortable enough to have a conversation with me to say, but you realize that you're straight from university, you've been working for 3 years while she's been working for 5.
Yes.
She has, more complexity in her role, the type of clients that she has, the scope, the level in which she performs at. Another thing is that performance also influences the pay differences, because if we are having a performance scale and you are rated a 4 out of a 5 and I'm rated a 3, you are likely to get a higher increase than what I should get. And that automatically would yield to the difference in salary. So in certain instances, it's fairly justified in terms of why we have differences. But where it's unfair is when certain people are paid way above the others and it can never be justified, because then there's an element of favoritism, there's an element of, unconscious bias, you form part of a clique also, which those things should not really be influencing some of the paying decisions, but unfortunately they have happened in few instances.
Yeah. So let's talk about UIF, pay as you earn, stuff that appears in our pay slips at the end of the month, but we actually don't know what it is. Can you just shed some light on what those are and why it's important for me as an employee to know about that?
So as an employee, right, and whether permanent or on a fixed term contract or a seasonal worker, there are mandatory deductions that your employer will make. For example, your employer is registered to pay tax. It means that you are registered to pay tax as well, which is your pay as you earn, right? And there's different tax brackets depending on how much you earn. And then the UIF, which is the Unemployment Insurance Fund, which we contribute 1%. You contribute 1% as an employee, your employer contributes another. So that goes to an insurance fund in case that you get unemployed or you are unable to earn a salary at a point in time. For example, if you get dismissed, obviously it's involuntary, right? And then you can go and claim from the UIF because you contribute to it. So at the time that you don't have a job and you're still looking for a job, then you can actually claim from that fund. So it works like insurance. Same applies if you're retrenched. It's involuntary. So therefore, you will get to claim some money from that insurance. If you are on maternity leave, your employer does not pay for maternity leave, then you can actually claim for that from the unemployment fund. Or if your employer is, for example, paying 50%, then you can also claim probably the difference with the UIF. So the UIF is purely to provide you with insurance in instances that you are unable to receive an income for reasons that are involuntary or are not in your control. However, if you resign from your employment, you will not claim the UIF even if you are contributing, because resignation is voluntary. You took a decision to be out of employment, and therefore that insurance will not kick in. But if you have been dismissed, if you have, whether through a disciplinary hearing for misconduct, whether it's through poor performance, ill health, or injury on duty, then you can be able to claim for a certain period. So those deductions are there to actually guard you and guard your earnings, if I may put it like that. Then you will have sometimes like a pension fund or a provident fund, which other employers do not offer. So it's not probably part of their package, which is all good and well. And then you also have your medical aid, which also depends. Some organizations, they have that as a term and condition of employment, and it's mandatory for you to belong to one. And that is just to mitigate the risk in case that you get injured, in case that you're unable to work, that you are eligible for good, healthcare services. So those are some of the deductions that you would have. But one that you can never run away from is your pay as you earn and your UIF.
Okay. And in the case of salary disputes, what would you say the role of CCMA, for example, is versus the role of trade unions? Because we have seen trade unions in the past play a significant role when it comes to salary negotiations, specifically where salary increases are concerned.
So with the CCMA, you have recourse with the CCMA. For example, if your employer doesn't pay you at the end of the month, you can go to the CCMA for a dispute to say, I have not been paid. I've offered my services. I was supposed to get paid on the 25th, and I do not have an explanation, because I think they only give you a leeway to say if you are not able to pay on the day, then you've got 7 days to actually pay your employees. And if that doesn't happen, you can go to the CCMA for that, so that they can resolve that dispute. Or if maybe they did not pay you the money that was agreed on as per the employment contract, so you will have the recourse at the CCMA, because the CCMA is there for any employee and employer disputes. And then with the trade unions, what happens is that with the trade unions, you'd find that when there is salary increases annually, you would actually see with a lot of unions, you find that those people that actually belong to a particular trade union, and that union has a recognition agreement with the employer, then they get to negotiate the salary increase for that particular year on behalf of their members, right? So in a unionized environment, you'd find that in a unionized environment where there's also a recognition agreement, which is an agreement between the trade union and the employer to say that we recognize you as a trade union, you have enough representation, or the majority of your members are actually in our employ, then we get into an agreement in terms of how we're going to be managing all the employee or employment related matters, and then the union comes in. So they negotiate on behalf of their members. So if they agree on a certain percentage, it means all their members, or maybe all the people in that particular organization, will be subjected to that increase, especially if the union is the majority union, right? So that's what happens. So that's when they step in when it comes to annual increases, right? But not necessarily that they will be involved in any salary disputes, unless maybe there is a dispute with your employer around your salary and you want them to represent you in the conversation. Then the trade unions will do that as their member, to be able to help you with the grievance that you might have.
And any final thoughts on starting this difficult and uncomfortable conversation with your manager? What do you do? What do you say? How do you even start it?
I think what's important is to make sure that you prepare yourself to have a conversation around your salary with your employer or your manager. If you want to request for an increase, prepare yourself mentally and psychologically, because it's not an easy conversation. And once you prepare yourself emotionally and psychologically, make sure that you get your facts right. Make sure that you've got your evidence to support your request, and understand the why. Why am I asking for this? You need to be able to understand the why, and the why needs to actually substantiate or give you a compelling case, right? And that needs to be supported by performance, that needs to be supported by results, that needs to be supported by matrix, right? What is it that you are contracted to do? Have you went over and above, what you were asked for? Did you deliver exceedingly beyond expectations, right? Did you take on more work? Are you receiving positive feedback from your clients? Are you operating at a level higher than where you are? And that will actually get to inform and help you build a case to have that conversation with your line manager confidently. So
yeah. And where can our audience find more of your content and insights? And are you able to then coach them on a one-on-one basis in terms of how they can start having these difficult conversations?
Definitely. So I'm available on most social media platforms. On Twitter, it's Dunster_Boniwe. LinkedIn, Facebook, IG, which is Instagram, it's Boniwe Dunster. You will find me there. Alternatively, you can pop me an email at boniwe@blueeaglehc.co.za. And yes, I do offer coaching sessions to people that require support in terms of helping to build their careers, or just, a once-off consultation, maybe if you do have a disciplinary hearing, or if you want to actually, build the confidence to actually negotiate that salary with your employer. I do offer such services.
Amazing.
Thank
you
you
once again for your insights. And that's it for episode 3 of our series titled The HR Perspective with Boniwe Dunster. And you can certainly follow Wellness in the Workplace on Instagram at wellnessintheworkplace_. The podcast is available on all major podcast streaming services. My name is Mbalim Ziane. I will see you on the next episode. Goodbye.